Hi everyone and welcome to Lockdown Writing Class with Elle McNicoll, session number 8. We are on genre. Genre, right. So, I might get some people who have PhDs in genre fiction, saying this isn't an accurate or a up-to-date version of genre, but you know what? The comments are disabled. I don't care. This is just a very quick and basic rundown of genre. And the reason I think it's important to talk about is because some people like to say, my writing doesn't have a genre. Not true. Every writing is a genre, and people who think that they're, the work that they're doing, which is sometimes called literary fiction, and they think that's not a genre, it is. I hate to tell you. So, nothing is genre-less. So we're going to talk about the genres that exist in children's fiction, which are very diverse and very broad, because children's fiction is like adult fiction, all-encompassing, and there's so much to talk about. And I don't think we'll actually get to everything that exists, but we're going to try. So, what's a good thing to start off with? Well, I'll go through genres in their very basic kind of way that we can understand, and then I'm going to use some great middle grade titles, which are just some of the many great middle grade titles that exist in these genres. So we're going to start with probably the two most popular genres in middle grade, which is children's fiction, middle grade and YA. And the first is fantasy. Fantasy is incredibly popular, for good reason. Harry Potter and Narnia and Lord of the Rings kickstarted a whole, generations of people that love fantasy. So, what does something have to incorporate to be a fantasy? Well, fantasy deals with the impossible. Not the improbable, not the implausible, although that can be in there as well, but the impossible. So if something is impossible by nature, at least where we are now, some things, who knows what will be possible in one day, but what is impossible now, so people who can fly, people who can read minds, people who can move things with their minds or with their hands, things that unimaginative people would say are impossible. Who knows what is possible? There could be magic in the world, but things that are deemed impossible are usually what constitutes fantasy. So magic, witchcraft, time travel, all these things, all these fun, exciting things to write about usually mean fantasy. Fantasy does not have to be Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth with orcs and elves and hobbits. It can be set in the real world and still be a fantasy. Harry Potter is, again, I know everyone's heard of it, so it's a good example to use. We slip through Diagon Alley and we're in another world, and it's still fantasy. We've got things that we recognise, like King's Cross and Surrey and and Charing Cross Road, but then you cross over into this fantastical world as well, so that's still fantasy. So I want to talk about some great fantasies, and there are subgenres in fantasy, but I've just grabbed some ones that I really, really like. So this is a proof copy, which means that the book is, as of right now, the book is out, but when I was sent this a couple of months ago, it wasn't. This is Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, and it's a brilliant fantasy, very sort of Men in Black. Amari's brother has gone missing a couple of years ago, and the police have given up on the case, but she knows that there's more to the story, and an exciting bureau get in touch, and magic and excitement ensues, and there's an evil magician, all good stuff. So this is a great example of fantasy, and fantasy with real world elements. Like I said, this is a proof copy, which means it's not the final version. The final version is out now, and it's great, and you should read it. But that's a great example of fantasy. Then this is fantasy as well, but it's done in a very literary fairy tale type way, and it is the wonderful works of Sophie Anderson. If you're a fan of Sophie Anderson, I know you will be. She's also written The House with Chicken Legs and The Girl Who Speaks Bear, and they are all Russian folklore, but told in a very literary and modern way, but sort of like fairy tales, I suppose. So this is a sort of fairy tale fantasy, which is different to Amari. But still super exciting, and as I know you guys will have read at least one of her books, and they are incredibly fantastical. So that's another example of fantasy. Then we move into what still can be fantasy, but I like to call fantasy adventure. So that would be, Aisha Bushby does these really well, so Pocket Full of Stars and Moonchild. Fantastical elements, but also adventure. So it's less about kind of Well, they still can be fairy tale like, but it's got that kind of driving excitement. Another adventure with sort of magical, fantastical elements I really, really enjoyed is The Secret of Birds and Bones by Karen Millwood Hargrave. Karen writes really great fantastical books and really great adventure books as well. Plot really moves along quickly in this one. So fantasy is a genre with subgenres like urban fantasy, epic fantasy, which is things like Game of Thrones. Fantasy has many subgenres, but ultimately what it does is it's dealing with the magical, the fantastical, hence the word fantasy, and it's dealing with the impossible. The exciting things that we're told are impossible. So walking through a mirror into a different world, or falling into a lake and discovering an underwater kingdom. Exciting, fantastical things where there really aren't limits to your imagination. So if that's the kind of story you're writing, it's good to know that so you can lean into those fantastical elements and really celebrate the fact that you're writing a fantasy. So what else do we have? We have, oh yes, the second most popular genre, I think right now in middle grade, because there are so many great ones, is detective fiction. So crime. Things like Murder Most Unladylike by Robin Stevens, a fantastic series which ended last year in August with Death Set Sail. Daisy and Hazel are detectives. They're young detectives and they are solving murders in every book. We've got all the books here, you can see I've got sprayed edges as well, I love it. But it's detective fiction and it's one of the most classic genres, Agatha Christie being the absolute maestro, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, etc. There's a murder, there's a body, and we're solving the case, and that's what people expect when they read detective genres. They don't expect when they pick up a detective book to get to the end of it and have the detective go, I don't know, we'll never know, who knows who did it. That's not what people want from detective fiction. They want to work out the murder with the detectives who are the protagonists of the story. Miss Marple, another very famous Christie detective. So in middle grade we have the fantastic Murder Most Unladylike series. We have the wonderful High Rise Mystery series with Nick and Norva, and Mic Drop is the sequel, which is I really recommend reading Mic Drop because the murder in Mic Drop is quite something, and I really got a kick out of that. Poor Trosh Cat. But they are a fantastic duo, and that's another key to excellent detective fiction is the heroes have to be super likeable. So another one, I don't have it with me at hand, but the Adventures on Train series with Uncle Nat and Hal Harrison by M.G. Leonard and Sam Sedgman. Those are adventure and detective fiction together. So we have the Highland Falcon Thief, so we're dealing with a jewel thief. Kidnap on the California Comet is the second one. Clue in the name, there's a kidnapping. And then the third one, which I think is out today or this week, which is Murder on the Safari Star, which is set in South Africa, and it's a murder. At last, you start with a jewel thief and you work your way up to murder. But they're a great kind of marriage of two genres in that they are adventures because we're on these fast, trains that are speeding through these incredible landscapes, and then there's also detective work going on as well. So I know a lot of you will know those books, Adventures on Trains. So that's detective fiction. We also have Anisha, the Accidental Detective. There's so many great detective books out now, which I think honestly is a result of the people who write them growing up as people who loved reading and loved books, but not having any detective books with kids in them. So I think that's why there's such an incredible golden age of child detective books at the moment. But anyway, that's an incredibly popular genre, both in middle grade and in adult fiction. People love a murder mystery, they love a detective story. So if you're writing a murder mystery or detective story, then it's really important to understand that genre, the reader expects the crime to be solved by the end. And they want to know all the ways that the murder or the crime happened. So that's something important to remember, and that the crime has to happen quite early on. So that's a great genre. Then we have science fiction, which is, funnily enough, what my new book, Show Us Who You Are, is. This is going to be out on World Book Day, 4th of March, and this is science fiction because it deals with artificial intelligence, which is something that does exist. And science fiction, unlike fantasy, it does not deal with the impossible necessarily. It deals with the improbable and the implausible, something that potentially could happen one day, but currently is not that plausible. So in this book, there's a company called Pomegranate, and they use holograms to recreate real people, and those holograms can look and talk and sit and stand just like people. Which is something I think we're getting closer and closer to every day, which is why I wrote about it. And that's why it's science fiction. And it has elements of dystopia, and dystopias are also a subgenre of science fiction. So things like Hunger Games, you know, where we're in a futuristic world where things have gone a bit wrong. This is sort of a pre-dystopia, I'd say. It's just before everything maybe goes a bit wrong. But that's a great genre as well. And I loved, this is technically sci-fi, I think, actually, Harriet versus the Galaxy by Samantha Baines. It's about a girl called Harriet who has a hearing aid, and that hearing aid allows her to hear aliens and communicate with them, and it's incredibly good fun, and it's a hardback, which I love. So that's science fiction, and then very simply we have contemporary fiction as well, which is a kind of spark, which is set in our world, and you know, all about characters, relationships, and about plots that could really happen. Pretty simple, pretty understandable, kind of spark, could happen, real, contemporary. So not much to say about that. What else have we got? Horror is getting more popular, I think. Last year there were a lot more horror books out than the year before. Wranglestone, this is a YA, so maybe a little bit old for some of you, but it's a horror story, and it's about, as you can see, this great little cover, it's about zombies, so horror. And Crater Lake, which we talked about, is sort of horror meeting science fiction. So you can blend genres, don't feel that you're stuck in rules. And then finally, I would say we will talk about historical fiction. So something like The Vanishing Trick by Jenny Spangler, a brilliant book, which is very Dickensian and has a sort of Fagin-type villain and is set in the Victorian age. So a historical genre is something that is obviously written in a historical time, which is probably at this point anything before 1980. That's probably where we get to the cutoff point. So World War II, you know, Midnight Guardians by Ross Montgomery, and The Vanishing Trick, which I loved, very, very atmospheric. And with historical fiction, you're gonna want to do your research, and you're gonna want to make sure that you get everything as accurate as possible, because you will, believe me, get people getting in touch with you to say, well, that wasn't accurate and that didn't actually happen. So it's good to be as accurate as possible, and use that as a sort of framework to find the story and find the exciting things. And you can still have fantastical elements like this one. So good fun. So that's, whoa, and there's so much more I could say about genre. I mean, you see, right? There's so many different ways to tell a story. And it really does help when you're writing a novel or a story to know what genre it fits into, because the reader is going to know regardless, and they're going to expect certain things from genre. Your detective fiction reader is going to expect that the murder or the kidnapping or the thief will be caught by the end of the book and brought to justice, that something's going to be revealed by the end of the book. They're going to expect that. This isn't relevant for middle grade, but a romance reader is probably going to expect that the two, you know, leads get together by the end of the book. That's kind of expected from a romance. Comedies are usually expected to end happily. Tragedies are usually expected not to. You know, a fantasy book, they're going to expect a lot of imagination and a lot of high stakes and excitement. A contemporary book, people are going to expect you to touch on real world things and to tap into authenticity. That's the great thing about writing a contemporary book, is that people see themselves in it and they let me know, and it's incredibly moving when they do that. And with science fiction, and at least what I've tried to do with the show, it's important to ask a question. It's important to ask, well, I won't say what the question is in show, but there is a question, and you're asking the reader that question, and you're asking them to make a judgment about the state of the world that we do live in, and whether that's how we want to keep proceeding. So that is a very rough cut of genre, and I love genre so much. And one of the most exciting things about starting a new book is knowing that you might be going into a certain genre. So the book I'm writing right now, or the book that I hope to start writing, the book which I kind of hope will be my third middle grade book, is going to be a fantasy. There's going to be magical elements involved, and I really am excited about that. But it's important, if you're going to do that, to respect the genre and to know exactly what, you know, what everyone else is writing and what people expect from that genre. So your assignment is to have a think about what genre you might be writing in, and let me know. I'm really excited to hear from you. I've been enjoying all your work so far, and also I know Aberlady Primary School might be watching this, and I think that's where I met Marley, who I said I was writing a character called Marley, and you said, is it a boy or a girl? And at the time it was a girl, and you were upset, and then I said I would make it a boy. That hopefully is going ahead in book 3, Marley, so while it won't be in show, it will hopefully be in book 3, so look out for that, hopefully in this fantasy book. And I'm not doing a featured author this week because we have so many of the authors featured in these incredible, and these are just some of the incredible books that are available right now that are, you know, masterly works of their genre. But the bookshop that I really want to shout out this week is Blackwell's Edinburgh, which is the only Blackwell's in Edinburgh, I believe, and it's the most gorgeous, giant, enormous bookshop, and they have been so great to me, such unbelievable allies in a difficult year last year, and also this year as well, going into, you know, we're in another lockdown, and I just love them, and I just wanted to give them a massive shout out. So thank you guys, have a think about genre, and let me know. Bye!